Welcome to the fourth of our monthly conversations with Konstantin, who is one of the most respected voices on YouTube about what is happening inside Russia. Konstantin Samoilov is a well-known YouTuber whose channel Inside Russia comments insightfully on Russia's descent into authoritarianism over the last few years, but now, like many others, he's outside Russia with no idea of when he or his family can return. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. If you find this video interesting, please do share the link so you can discover the other fantastic speakers that we feature. Consider becoming a patron or buy me a coffee to help us maintain the quality and frequency of output of videos. But Konstantin, I'm delighted to welcome you back.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's fantastic to be back. Thanks for having me.
Now, we debated about the frequency of whether we'd run out of things to talk about, but I don't think there's any, there's no lack of things to address here. And we're going to start with two, I think, interesting topics. One is one we were sort of discussing just before we hit record, and that is the rather curious pronouncement by Alexander Dugin that he's going to stop referencing the infamous Z and V symbols, not because of their, intrinsic sort of fascistic sort of symbolism, but he says they're now associated, they're now tainted with the ideas of defeat and humiliation. I mean, I don't know what you think of that. It does seem that Z bloggers are reacting to this. And of course, Alexander Dugin has a considerable amount of respect amongst the so-called turbo patriots and Z bloggers.
Well, I wouldn't call that respect, but influence. Let's put it this way. And this is a new development for me. I am surprised, actually shocked. And all I can say is, well, good morning, Z Patriots, smell the coffee.
It's taken quite a long time, and I suspect they will find other ways to express, the aggression that underlies much of the propaganda and Telegram channels that sort of focus on these themes. The other big question, and I think this is quite a difficult one, isn't it? Because of, let's say, the lack of maybe media observers and so on, but we have heard that Chinese goods are flooding into Russia to replace the Western goods, the Western brands that have been exiting. Do you have any idea of the scale of this? And have you heard anything about how these goods are being sort of, what's people's view on this? Are they happy to have these substitutions, or are people perhaps complaining about the changes or the quality of the goods?
There is a huge wave of goods from China. They are replacing pretty much everything that was manufactured, supplied in the West, or at least manufactured in China by Western companies, according to the Western standards. Just give you one example. In the last 12 months, 88% of cars sold in Russia have been Chinese. And right now, in the last few months, people started massively complaining about quality of the cars. Well, the Chinese cars aren't Mercedes and BMWs, so everything else is being replaced. Yes, there is no shortage of products or food in Russia at this point, but yes, everything is getting replaced by the Chinese goods, manufactured in China according to the local Chinese quality standards. So the substitution is there. Quality, well, far from the best in the world.
And this is a much bigger issue, isn't it? I mean, consumer goods are one thing, but when it comes to machine tools, when it comes to the equipment required to maintain, service, or even manufacture equipment, it's a much bigger issue, isn't it, if those are of inferior quality?
Huge issue. There are so many industries that relied on the Western technologies, and obviously most, if not all, companies, foreign companies from the West have left Russia. And not only they have left, they've taken the technologies, they've taken spare parts, they've stopped supplying tools, machines, and so forth. And the best Russians can do right now is to substitute with the Chinese. Well, first of all, the Chinese, they don't have some of the technologies at all. For example, oil drilling. China is not big in oil drilling. The best they can do is to buy a machine, a product, and do re-engineering and manufacture their own cell. But the quality is it's very low. Okay, and some of machines, some of the tools, they can't even re-engineer. So big problem.
Nowhere is that more apparent than the airline industry. And we discussed this last time, but since then, we've seen extremely dramatic footage of emergency landing of planes. We've had stories of crucial parts failing on planes so they can't even take off. This is starting to become a massive issue, isn't it?
It has. Well, Jonathan, it's taken a few months. You see, when you have a car or a plane, doesn't matter, it's sophisticated machine that, if well maintained, will last you a long time, will operate according to how it's supposed to operate. But once you stop servicing it, it's not going to fall apart or stop running, stop flying the very next day. It's going to take some time for it to for some parts to wear out, for some things need to be replaced. And I've heard different times, from 6 to 18 months. Well, this is about 18 months now, and we start seeing more and more accidents. So far, it's the record year for the airplane accidents, both in the air and on the ground. I think so far there has been 23. Okay. And yes, you cannot replace Boeing or Airbus parts. Not even Chinese can do that. You can try to buy them and export to Russia in secret. Okay. But it's really difficult with airplane parts. Okay. Because it's not your typical car, Chinese or even German car, and all the spare parts, they're numbered and they're traced and so forth. So it's when I send my family to fly somewhere, I choose a foreign airline. I never choose Russian airline anymore.
That sounds like a safe option. And of course, the subcontractors as well, the subcontracting companies are now all local, whereas previously they may have been a mixture. They may have had trainers and support from abroad. They may have had joint ventures with foreign partners. Now it is purely local contractors. And I'm assuming that the quality of contracted services is going to go down in terms of quality as well.
Well, I think it's safe to say that it does go down, because obviously you cannot replace representatives from Boeing or Airbus. Okay. You're absolutely right. The local subcontractors, they can only do so much.
One of the reasons that Russia's economy hasn't fallen apart, the wheels haven't fully come off sooner, is apparently the sort of skill of Elvira Nabiullina, the central banker. I know people have put the words liberal and labeled her with that, but certainly she does seem to be a skilled economist and banker. However, there have been some considerable political rumblings and people calling for her to be removed. Am I right in thinking that that could be a fairly catastrophic move for Putin's economy as it lurches back to more of a command economy? She perhaps is one of the only people who is holding this fragile show together.
Jonathan, I have a little different opinion. I think Elvira Nabiullina or not, it will not happen. It will not help Putin's economy. Okay. She has done, well, in my opinion, Elvira Nabiullina is one of the few professionals in current Russian government, real professionals. she's done a brilliant job to balance Russian economy in the last 18 months. And she's as much responsible for what the Russians have done to Ukraine and in Ukraine, though, you know, her hands are definitely in blood, but she's a professional at what she does at banking. Those rumblings of discontent, they have been heard lately, especially since the exchange rate, the ruble devalued in early August. Okay, but they're just populist outcries from Russian public figures, both propaganda and politicians. You see, in Russia, always, at any time, at any situation, at any part of history, there are two questions that dominate the society. They are who is guilty and what to do next. This is how Russian propaganda and politicians think and work. Now, let me give you an example. You know, Russian ruble is in free fall. It was 82. Now it's trading at 100 to American dollar. Russian currency is among top 3 worst performing currency in 2023. Inflation starts galloping. We're going to publicly blame someone for that, right? Who would that be? Of course, Elvira Nabiulina. It's her fault. Don't mind Russian economy turning into war economy. Don't mind Russian economy losing its main bread makers, you know, and earning so much less and spending so much more. Don't mind millions of Russians who have fled the country. Don't mind Russian troops in Ukraine killing and getting killed. Don't mind, you know, all these things. Don't mind that the Russia is aggressor. Don't mind that the country is in chaos. It's all Nabiulina's fault. You know, it's not the decision of Putin to invade Ukraine. No. We've got to blame someone, and that someone, of course, is Elvira Nabiulina. Because if we don't put the blame on someone, if we don't call a name, Russian people would blame us. And this is how it works in Russia. I mean, no more, no less. This is exactly why this is Nabiulina's fault, not Putin's fault. Okay, who is guilty? Finger pointing, her. That's it. But with her or without her, Russian economy is not doing well. She can slow down the demise, and she has been slowing it down, but this is inevitable.
And as you say, by slowing down that economic collapse, she is also prolonging the war, prolonging that moment when the fight is no longer sustainable. So, as you say, one could make the case that she's culpable for what's happening, along with
She's
others.
responsible. Yes, she's responsible. There's no question about that.
And there's going to be a lot more for people to point their fingers at. There's going to be a lot more blame going around, because the news that comes through since the last time we spoke is also of fuel shortages, of bans on export of fuel. We're also hearing that in some agricultural regions, they've run out of diesel. They can't bring the harvests in, which is surely catastrophically, not just economically, but to actually do the most basic commitment a government needs to do, and that's to feed its people. How did this arise, and how is the government trying to deal with this latest crisis?
In the Russian government way, as usual. Fuel shortages. That's something I haven't heard about in about 35 years. Last time I witnessed the fuel shortage was in 1989 in Crimea in the USSR. My father was born and raised in Crimea. So we used to vacation there every single year. And we usually stayed in a mountainous village some 6 kilometers away from the seaside, from the beach. That's where my father was born and grew up. And we usually took bus rides every morning to the beach and then back later at the day. But in 1989, we showed up in Crimea, and surprise, surprise, the bus didn't run because there were fuel shortages in the country. Countrywide problem, not just Crimea, but everywhere. Fuel was rationed for state enterprises only for agricultural, works and things like that, but very limited for public transportation. So we walked 6 kilometers every morning to the beach and then back to the village. And I was 13 years old, and I asked my dad, why we can't take bus and it doesn't run. And he looked at me, he answered, that's communists for you, son. And every step I took, I thought I couldn't stand communists. 1989, but I still cannot stand the communists. So we are in 2023 now, and fuel shortages are back. They were all but forgotten for, 35 years, but Russia is so advanced now, so rich, so everything is going so much according to the plan that at the end of 2023, they are having fuel shortages. They're back with a bang, I take it that the Russian people aren't terribly happy about the shortages, but that's what they wanted. They wanted to be back into the USSR, and they're back into the USSR. And the fuel shortages are just the beginning, okay? And there will come more fuel shortages and more shortages of other stuff. Well, that's what the USSR for you. Well, Jonathan, I actually brought popcorn. I knew you were going to ask me this question. My Uzbek-sized popcorn, this is what they sell for popcorn. I'm taking it, and
I asked the popcorn questions, yeah.
I'm watching the development of the show,
Yes. Well, it reminds me. I mean, communism. The other right here. Communism. There we go.
Popcorn.
We'll open that when I hit the other, the other questions right on the nose. But the idea of communism is that everything belongs to everybody. And there was one incident that really stuck in my mind. I'm in a village waiting for the bus to arrive, and the bus is 5 minutes late. And I ask one of the locals there, well, why is the bus late today? They go, oh, the bus is late every single day, which didn't make sense to me. You can probably guess what's coming. The bus comes into the village, it reverses into a dvor, into a courtyard of a dacha, and they siphon the fuel out every single day. 5 minutes, they get, quite a few liters out to fill the tractors, and then it comes to the stop and off it goes. I mean, we're going to start seeing more of that stuff. I think it went away, and now that sort of stuff is probably going to be back.
I can't believe it's back. I can't believe, Jonathan, that was like a nightmare. It was different country, different life. We everything changed in 91 when the USSR was changed into Russia, and Russia was born. And I can't believe it's back. It's like having a bad nightmare. Okay. But anyway, for the impact of the economy, I don't even know where to start. It's not good. It's not good having shortages. My take is the government will be stepping in to start controlling the industry more and more, the fuel market really, and it will not turn out well. It's never good when the government tries to regulate any market in any country. But when Russian government steps in and tries to regulate, that's a disaster. It'll be increasingly disbalancing, turning into chaos. Okay, but they actually have started they've started trying to balance to bring the fuel back to the markets. Okay, there are two problems in Russia. Well, now why there are shortages? Russia is so rich in oil, and it has processing plants. So it makes diesel fuel and it makes gas. But fuel inflation is the key point here. It started happening quite some time ago in the summer when ruble started devaluing. Usually mirrors the price of fuel usually mirrors ruble to dollar ratio exchange rate, and this time it was no exception. The wholesale prices started hitting record high starting in July after Prigozhin's mutiny, okay, because instability drove devaluation of ruble. And I mentioned that in my crazy Friday news updates, which I do every Friday, quite a few times, that I mentioned that St. Petersburg Fuel Exchange were trading, wholesale prices were higher and higher, and I think they were hitting record high for 15 consecutive days. Okay, that hadn't happened before. And that's when we start seeing changes at the gas pumps. It takes some time, a few weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, and that's been 6 weeks. And now, as a result, first of all, the prices at the local Russian gas stations went up, and then fuel shortages. There are two reasons for that: high price and fuel shortages, actually. First problem is fuel is one of those things that's a foundation of cost of everything. The fuel price goes up, cost of all products and services also go up. And that's what started happening in Russia. Much higher prices, they drive inflation up, and well, that's a vicious circle. The consumers will pay though, okay? So that's not such a huge problem for businesses, except for they cannot sell as much at higher price. But it's not pleasant, as higher prices at the gas stations, they create unrest among, the drivers, motorists, okay? And that's what Russian government hates to see. It hates to see people getting upset because, there's also first step in getting upset. First, they get upset about gas prices. Now then the second step, they start asking questions. Wait a second, why I'm paying so much, as everything is going according to the plan? Wait a second, what kind of plan? And, it develops. So, second much bigger problem is that the shortages, much more profitable for oil companies that make gas, process oil, refine oil, and make gas and diesel, much more profitable to sell abroad because prices are much higher. You see, Russian oil companies were not allowed to sell. They basically were compensated. The government wanted to keep prices low for the consumers. It compensated high prices. Basically, it picked up a part of the bill for every gas pump. Okay, this state program was called Fuel Damper Program. Okay, and the oil companies were lowering prices, but the Russian government was paying them. So it makes sense, right? You understand. And the Russian government's running out of money, so it stopped doing it. That's it. No more money to spend, because basically this damper program is burning money. Okay, so they're not compensating oil companies, and therefore oil companies raising prices. And the Russian government says, well, you can't do that because people are going to get upset. And the companies say, well, we'll not sell fuel at lower prices. We'll rather take it outside Russia and sell it there. Okay. Therefore, the shortages of fuel started appearing in the Russian market. And of course, that's huge blow for the industries, for agriculture, for everything else. So there are two problems, and the Russian government steps in and says, well, you know what? We're going to regulate the market. We ban all the exports outside Russia. So now you can only sell inside Russia. That's it. That's how Russian government takes care of crises.
And once you start tinkering with that machine, once you move away from the free market in the crucial energy industry, surely that's a slippery slope to having to take control of the entire economy, move to a kind of, war, communism, requisitioning type of policy. And with that comes a tightening of tyranny and repression, as history shows us.
Absolutely. You're absolutely spot on. I think the next step for oil companies will be shutting down the refineries, saying, hey, there are problems. We are out of certain technologies, spare parts, services, or we're doing regular maintenance, scheduled maintenance. Therefore, they won't be able, they won't be selling at the lower prices. And then the government will step in and say, oh, you're doing that in time of war, then, and we're going to prosecute you. We're not going to warn you anymore. And then we'll start prosecuting. That's going to be, a vicious circle. And you're absolutely right. Every time the government steps in, tries to regulate, not good. Russian government steps in, that's not good on steroids.
And there are also, dare I say it, some greedy mouths to feed. We see some of the businesses that have been exited from the market, Western businesses that have been sort of rebranded, often as kind of Me Too type brands, very similar branding. Some of these, like the Danone plant and facilities, have been given, I believe, to a Chechen warlord. So again, you've got a class of people, and say an avaricious, parasitic class of people who are, very well used to using violence to maintain their lifestyles. They're going to run out of assets to keep these guys happy at some point, surely.
Absolutely. And it's happened. Russia is not the first country for that to happen. It's happened before throughout the history of humankind. What they're doing right now is basically destroying Russian economy, not just in the moment, but in the future, for generations to come. Because look what has happened to Western businesses. Some were able to exit Russia some time ago. Some, it took them some longer time. Some have not been allowed to leave Russia. For example, Raiffeisen Bank. And I think that the top managers of the bank are being blackmailed, or they're probably, they're made offers they cannot refuse and things like that. So, and then there are some situations when the company just leave everything behind and just get away. Look at Renault. They built a very modern plant in the middle of Moscow, and it's worth €3.5 billion, and they sold it for €1 to Moscow government. Okay, but what's even worse, when the companies are stolen, like Denon and like Baltica, stolen from Carlsberg. There's actually people get in and replace the general director and say, we are the power, the authority here. We're the new owners. I mean, this is crazy. Do you think that any investor would want to step on Russian soil in the next 20 or 30 years, or 40? I don't know. I don't think so. Do you think that any company, Western company, large company such as, I don't know, Coca-Cola, Danone, Carlsberg, big food producers, once the war is over, hopefully Russia will become democratic, do you think they would want to come back to Russia? Risks are too high. I mean, look what has been done to them in this country, and they're not going to forget. And for generations, this Russian economy is just completely destroyed. In terms of the Russian investment climate has been destroyed. And you're also right. These people, now they're stealing from the foreigners who are defenseless and who cannot, defend themselves. But the next thing, they will run out of assets to steal, and they will start stealing from each other. They're like spiders in a jar. Okay. And at the end, the biggest spider will remain.
Biggest and strongest and hungriest spider.
Yeah.
And there's going to be there's going to be less money rather on the table, because the other announcements come through is that it's going to be a dramatic increase in the headline figure of what the military budget is going to be as a percentage of the total expenditure next year. But if you look at that and you strip away the announced figure, is it likely that the actual real percentage of GDP going on the military is going to be considerably high? One figure I've seen, which is speculative, I think, suggests it could be as high as 30% of GDP being channeled towards the war economy.
I don't think it's speculative figure. Um, it's don't forget that what they call the war economy, what they call the defense, is not just the army and the military expenses, the new hardware, and so forth. It's also the repression machine inside Russia. The KGB and the police and so forth. That's they considered part of the military spending as well. So considering there are so many people are employed by the government as a vertical of power, those agencies who can use violence against regular citizens, I think that 29% is about right.
And it's incredibly high. It's not as high, I believe, as the Soviet levels. But then the Soviet economy itself was technically, larger and more powerful than the current one. Obviously, the Warsaw Pact being part of a larger integrated economic system. We're also hearing not just rumors, but they're clearly legislative terms, and in technological terms, they've been preparing the ground for another massive wave of mobilization if it's needed. And this time, they're also talking about thinning out key workers in factories and forcing the others to go on to extended shifts. This surely is going to not go down well if it's enforced in the large urban centers.
Don't forget about the extension of working age. I've been asked many times, do you think they will raise the ceiling for retirees, so they can work longer at the factories? They probably will not do that, but what they're discussing right now is lowering the floor, the lowering the age when the kids can start working at the factories. Now it's 16, they want to make it 14. Okay. And you're absolutely right. There have been rumors, many rumors about extended shifts, and basically they are building up the war economy. They started off slowly this January and February, but they're getting the taste of it. Okay. Look how this budget for 24, look how much money they're going to spend on military expenses. Military industrial complex is definitely developing. If not for military industrial complex, Russian economy would be in ruins right now. Okay. That's the only thing that is somehow keeping it afloat. And they need more people. People are leaving Russia. They still live in Russia, and who's going to work at the factories? Who's going to go and who are they going to mobilize to go and fight in Ukraine? So they definitely making harsher, tougher conditions.
And turning to the war, we know it's not going particularly well, but there has been a hugely physically significant, strategically significant, but also highly symbolically significant impact, and that was the strike against the Black Sea Fleet headquarters. And then you had this extraordinary spectacle of an admiral who was apparently both alive and dead being paraded on the TV, and then footage which it's rumored was taken several days prior being aired as if it was current footage. Extraordinary, clownish situation. But that symbolism of the Black Sea Fleet headquarters being hit by a British-French missile, it's just extraordinarily resonant, isn't it? But what kind of psychological impact is that going to have on Russians and those who remain in Crimea?
You are so right by calling this clownish situation. It's not just this particular situation. It's everything in Russia has turned into clownish. I call it the crazy madhouse. Okay. And this Sevastopol strike is the same thing. The strike was big, and the pictures started surfacing right after people. It was in the middle of a city, in the middle of a day, right? So a lot of people were filming. And then all the Z channels and the Russian official propaganda started. First thing, what they did, they started warning people, oh, don't you ever take pictures or videos and post them, because that's a criminal offense. You're going to get locked up. And there was a first case of one lady who took pictures and posted it somewhere. She's being charged with breaking the law. Okay. So we can look at the Sevastopol strike at two angles. First angle is Russian government. Definitely big psychological impact on Russian government. It feels less secure. It feels that Ukrainian rockets can reach longer now. The rumors have it that part of the Black Sea fleet has been transferred away from Sevastopol into Novorossiysk. So I think, judging by the small signs, that, they got the message. But another angle is Russian people. Not much of an impact there, at least visible impact, and of course, a situation was downplayed by the propaganda greatly. But still, if you hear that major news, and there was news about the strike on all Russian news channels, right? If you hear something like that, you start asking questions, and then start asking yourself questions, and then you start asking everyone else. And Russian people, they don't. They seem that they're in some kind of lethargic sleep, and they just don't think critically any longer. I think that the situation shows very well that has been normalization of war in this situation going on in Russia. And of the admiral, that's part of the normalization. They just give some news here and there, and no one knows whether he's alive, he's dead. They show perhaps older footage, but then they don't say anything about it. And then after a couple of weeks, people simply forget about the event, forget about his existence, and that's it. They act as if nothing happened.
Like Surovikin and
Same thing.
Girkin, many others there. Yeah.
Girkin, oh my gosh, look, he just doesn't exist anymore. No one talks about Girkin. Well, how about the mutiny? There was a huge mutiny in Russia, okay? Putin came out, addressed the nation. Prigozhin made him look so small, so weak. Putin's hands were shaking, and he was addressing everyone, oh, please help, unite behind me, and crush those who were announced the mutiny. It happened. Jonathan, it happened. We witnessed it.
It was real. We saw it.
It was real. That's right. We saw it. We still have footage of everything. I know people in Rostov who actually went and touched the tanks and took pictures of that tank that was stuck in the circus building and everything. So those pilots who were shot down, they're dead. Okay, it's real. But in Russia, they act as if nothing happened, as if there was no mutiny, as if they're just erasing everything from media, and they hope that people will forget. And you know what? They probably will forget.
I mean, that mirrors the title of, rather a well-known book. It was a long time ago, and it never happened anyway, which is by someone who's been appeared on this channel, David Satter, one of the first journalists one of the most recent journalists to have been chucked out of Russia. That's already a couple of decades ago, but it's the same thing. It's like we can make it disappear.
Name. Yes. Perfect name.
And by extension, there are other cascades, other domino effects happening. One of those, of course, is weakening imperial power within Russia's sphere. And we've seen these extraordinary scenes of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which has been going on for a good 2 decades or longer, but it's been a hot war on and off for the last 2 or 3 decades. All it took was a couple of days. All it took was a weakening of Russian power and resolve in the region, and suddenly, bang, it's gone. Are we going to see more and more of these conflicts that are symptomatic of collapsing imperial and military influence?
I think so. I think so. We have been seeing, and you're so right. You're just calling it the right name. It's the weakening. You see, the empire cannot be weak. Once it gets weakened, it starts falling apart. Okay, because empire is always based on strength, power, cruelty. Okay, and once it cannot maintain that cruelty, that control, that power, that's it. It's not the empire any longer, and this is exactly what's happening with Russia. Armenia is a very good example. Armenia is good example of what's happening outside of Russia with its allies in Chechnya. What's happening in Russia was actually what will happen in Russia very soon. Armenia is gone out of Russian sphere, and it's a sign to the others. There's a signal to the others. You ally with Russia, same thing happened to you. This is just beginning of huge falling apart of the sphere, I would say. And what's happening in Chechnya is a very good example too. I don't know if you saw the video. As a guy who burned Quran, he was beaten, and it seems like this province of Russia has different laws and is just not a part of Russian legal system. Okay, and I think this is a preview of what will happen in the future in many regions of Russia. This is what happens when the vertical of power, which is very strong, by the way, Putin he perfected the vertical of power, but it's a preview of what will happen when the vertical of power will be falling apart, breaking into pieces, into parts, very strong parts and pieces, and those pieces will be acting independently. And I think you understand what I mean.
Absolutely do. I mean, that footage didn't shock me as much as it perhaps ought to have done, because the thought went around my head that probably every evening in a SIZO, in the cells somewhere in a police station, some unknown person is being beaten in exactly the same way. But it's not filmed, and we'll never know their names. I know that it was deeply shocking for many people, deeply shocking, I think, for many Russians who are seeing that footage. But the casual violence that is almost certainly unfolding in every town, village, city, is we may never know about it, but I can imagine it going on. I think it's plausible.
Not so much of the violence. There wasn't much violence there per se. When I was growing up, I had fights like that. It was 90s were a tough time. We used to fist fight a lot. Everyone did in Russia. But what really surprised and shocked me was what happened after, and the reaction the society had to this about this accident, this event. That's the reaction. That's what surprised me. Didn't shock, but surprised me.
That's right. Opinion divided as to whether that was the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do. I mean, there was some.
I mean, we saw a breaking of the law right in front of us, evidence and the whole 9 yards, and then public officials backing it up. Putin basically backing it up, and indirectly, but he's sending message. That's what really surprised me.
Well, we've saved the question to last, which I think is going to trigger you popping that popcorn packet open. This is, of course, the off the scale. I mean, even for her, this is a new level of crazy. And this is Margarita Simonyan and her extraordinary proposal to detonate a huge thermonuclear weapon over Siberia to create an effect. I believe what she had in mind, I think I've spoken to a physicist. I'm in Oxford, so I have access to physicists. They've told me this wouldn't work. But she's proposed just, detonating the nuclear device over Russia, so it's not attacking NATO, but it would cause a chain reaction where Western satellite networks would destroy each other, a little bit like the film Gravity. This, interestingly, has caused some dissent amongst lawmakers and Z patriots. This is a step too far, even for them, which I didn't think there was any step too far. But apparently, even for them, this is fairly crazy stuff.
I'm not gonna open my popcorn for that. Some things, well, most, if not all things, all the news coming out of Russia are crazy, but some of them are so crazy that they cannot be considered crazy. That's just a different definition of crazy, And I think what Simonyan said was out of that category. I don't know what to say, really. I've seen as much as you have, all of you have. There are videos of her saying that. I mean, again, we're coming back to that trying to erase from memories. Jonathan, it happened, and it happened day before yesterday. It happened. We all saw it. We have videos to back it up. And basically what happened next day is the reaction in the society was very negative and very strong. And there were a lot of people in Siberia actually standing up and saying, wait a second, you want to, explode this bomb over us in Russia, inside Russia? And then even Peskov came out and said, well, we have nothing to do with Simonyan. She's not an official, her opinion is her personal opinion. Even he backed up, from that. It's so crazy. But what followed was also crazy. One of the deputies of a representative of Moscow State Duma, a Moscow City Duma, parliament, actually went to police and filed a report demanding police to check Simonyan's message for extremism, because it's just way, way too far, And she got upset the following day very much because some guy she doesn't even know, he did that. So she went to the police and she demanded to investigate him, for demanding police to investigate her. So this is a mad circus. Okay. I don't know whether substances involved or that's just how she thinks. I don't know how to comment that. I'm sorry.
No, it's just too crazy. But it's symptomatic. I mean, the interesting part is the bit you highlighted, which is people then turning on each other and we're back to the spiders in the jar, running out of things to consume, running out of money, running out of things that fuel their lifestyles, competing for the sort of attention and scarce resources. We're probably going to see quite a lot more of that.
One of the first early signs of the system collapsing big time is when people inside the system, inside the vertical of power, will be going against each other. And in propaganda, propaganda is a fairly small world. There are just a few people, there are few faces. Once they will start turning against each other, they will be doing that. That's going to be a clear sign that the system is so feverish, it's shaking and it's breaking apart. Okay, you watch for these signs. because it's a sure sign that the things are so not well that the end is near.
And this will happen in the big cities, won't it? This will be in Moscow, maybe St. Petersburg. It's not going to happen in the countryside or provincial towns. We need to look at the political fervor in the big city. I assume Moscow is going to be where things are most visible if and when they do fall apart.
Well,
Or is that maybe that's wrong? I don't know.
I meant when people inside propaganda will start turning against one another, Simonyan against Solovyov and blaming each other and things like that. So, and then people inside KGB will be doing that, people inside the system, okay? And of course, that will send aftershocks into the Russian society. But then it'll originate, it'll start happening inside the system. That's what I believe. But then once it starts happening, it'll definitely be heard in the big cities and in the small villages.
Let's then save the popcorn for that. I think the idea of the FSB wiping each other out is the authentic popcorn moment. And as long as they limit it to themselves and don't involve ordinary civilians in their struggles, I think that's probably, yeah. I mean, that's a lot to digest. I think we've got through a lot of stuff. As always, it's not necessarily comfortable topics. It's difficult. It's clownish. It raises some humor, but it's also deeply depressing in many ways as well.
It's incredibly depressing and tough.
Yeah, it is. We don't want to gloss over that. Sometimes we try to mock things because I think that's one way of coping with them, but it's a deeply distressing situation for so many people, including in Ukraine, obviously. And I think the way you tackle these issues without, as you say, propaganda, without BS, it's incredibly refreshing. And we're so glad that you can share your time and insights on this. And thank you so much again, Konstantin.
Jonathan, thank you for having me here. Pleasure as always. Thank you.